Wow. Wow. Brooke, welcome back. Where'd she go?
She ran down there.
Oh, right in front of me. Yes. So it is my honor to introduce our speaker, teacher, spiritual leader, guru, wonderful persons for this part of our service. And today I'm especially honored to welcome, well, it keeps going away, so let me just punt, okay? You all know Lesa Walker very well. She's been here how long, Lesa?
Since 97.
Since 1997. Mm-hmm. So you will recognize her for many places in this spiritual facility because she leads the chaplains. She leads the newcomers, yes, and is really, she's one of the poles that keeps us up. She's one of the stanchions, right? So what I love most is that she's so real. She's so real. Thank you for that. She will be doing the What is Unity class next Sunday. She does it several times a year. So if you have interest in becoming a member, and she will tell you more about that, be sure that you plan to take the class next week. So with all of that, give us some love. And
I will give you what I
got. Grace and generosity.
And hopefully it will be received. Good morning. It's great to see everybody here. It's great to know that there's people watching us online. They're just sitting back with their coffee and their feet up, so don't y'all try that. Keep coming in. We miss you guys, the ones we haven't seen in a while. And did you guys know there's probably a couple hundred people that watch our service after we're done with it throughout the week? So that's good. Our message is getting out there. I hope everybody who maybe wasn't here last week did get a chance to listen to Adam's talk. It was amazing. It was right what I needed, right on time. It was actually the talk I was going to give today. But what I loved about Adam's talk is that it was given with so much love and so much generosity for the people that he serves. I would have come at it with a little tinge of because I was a little upset hearing that there's an order in which I am supposed to love people in the world. Because my interpretation was like what Adam gave us. My interpretation is that we are to love everyone, even the ones we don't agree with, even the ones that seem like enemies to us. And out of that love, where there is no order to be assigned, we are one in spirit. Out of that love comes some generosity, some grace, something that we want to give back into the world. We are in a season that some of us may know about and some may not. The Association of Global New Thought. Did I get that right, David? AG&T. It's a New Thought organization. In 1998, they started a season for nonviolence. And it starts on the anniversary of Mohandas Gandhi's death, and it ends on the anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s death. And those are two men we know them so well for the idea of nonviolence, the idea of bringing peace into the world. And part of that is the idea of bringing economic justice into the world. So we know Mohandas Gandhi for saying, be the change you want to see, be the peace you want to see. But I love this. There is enough for the need of everyone in this world, but not enough for the greed. I love that. There's enough calories to feed every person, every 8 billion person in this world, but there's not enough room for the greed that would hold people back from having the generosity to get that food, those calories, where they need to go. We think of Martin Luther King Jr. for I have a dream. I have a dream. But the day that he did that speech, I have a dream, I'm not sure it was really planned. I've heard stories that one of the people in the audience said, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." And it turned into the speech that we know today. But what he was there for was for economic justice. He was there to talk about the idea that we need to get over this poverty where we separate people out and we have a hierarchy. We put some people on the top with a lot of money and some people on the bottom with very little. And these are his words. "I have the audacity to believe that peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their body, education and culture for their minds, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits." And I think probably most of us in this room grew up in a fairly middle-class way where we were able to have all of that, and we were able to give all of that to our children. But there's a lot of people that weren't, and things are kind of trending towards a wider divide in income and wealth in the United States these days. And I don't want to get, you know how I am, but I don't want to get too much into that. But I just want to say there is, right now 50% of Americans living on 2.5% of our national wealth. That's kind of out of balance. If you walk around Dallas, we have nearly a 20% poverty rate. So, yeah, this isn't your typical unity prosperity talk, I'm sorry. I do love unity prosperity. I love our principles of abundance. I love the teachings that we have. I love 4T, where you give 10% of your time, talent, and treasure. And I think that sometimes when we talk about a number like that, we start to parse our way through it, right? Oh, do I give 10% on everything I ever got? Or do I give 10% on my adjusted gross income? Or do I give 10% after I've paid my tax? We start our ego gets in there and it starts trying to figure out what that 10% is. And where does the generosity end up when we're sitting there trying to figure out that number? So we are leaning into the idea of generosity and abundance that's there for everybody and flows out to everyone that needs it, including this place here. Sometimes we need some of that abundance. But I wanted today to look back a little bit at the spiritual inheritance of Jesus, our way shower. And there's probably more to it than I know. I was talking to someone this weekend. She told me something else, and I was like, okay, but I'm educated in biblical studies. So I'm going to have to go from that viewpoint, that Jesus grew up with ancient Hebrew scriptures. He had those in his mind, and he didn't come to do away with those. He came to bring expansiveness and beauty to those teachings that had already started becoming codified and strict and very rule-ish and were really not encouraging the heart of the matter. He came to expand that. And he came into a time that was, I don't know, you guys, there's some parallels that I can't avoid. It was an imperialistic time. The Romans were ruling over the Hebrew people at the time. And they actually had the Herods were the Hebrew governors of the regions that they lived in. They had a Herod during Jesus' lifetime that renamed a large body of water called the Sea of Galilee after the current emperor. He renamed it Tiberias, the Sea of Tiberias. And that very sea was being overfished. It was being incorporated and commoditized for the Roman Empire. So when Jesus tells the story of, when the Gospels tell the story of Jesus going out into the boat and saying, fish over here, and catching all those fishermen hadn't caught any fish all night because there weren't very many fish left in the sea, because they were overfishing it, and they were making fish cakes and sauce to send out to the armies that they had stationed all over their vast empire. I love when you put these scriptures into context, how it makes it even more alive to things that we see in our world today. Rudy and I went to Newfoundland, and that's the story in Newfoundland. Overfishing by corporations, just totally undoing the lifestyles of people that relied on that for their living. But it turns out that if you go to the scriptures that Jesus grew up with, that the God, the divinity, the I am that I am of the Hebrews had a plan for economic sufficiency and sustenance for the people. They'd extricated themselves from slavery. They no longer could rely on those huge Egyptian storehouses of food and being fed whatever. I don't know what they were fed as enslaved people, but they couldn't rely on that. And they're in a desert, and they've got no idea where their food is going to come from. But there's a plan, and it involves bread every morning and meat every evening. And the scripture focuses on the bread that's going to come down every morning, and it's going to come down like rain, and it's going to come down in just the right amount. So I might work my fingers to the bone to get all the bread I can get, and Anne's not working quite as fast. And guess what? She's going to get exactly what she needs, and I'm going to get exactly what I need. And that was the plan, and I think it's so beautiful. And they couldn't store it up. The ones that tried to say, oh, I'm not going to eat it today, I'm going to save it for tomorrow, it turned into worms. And that's just kind of gross. Except for one day. On the sixth day, they were allowed to gather 2 jars so that they could truly rest on the seventh day, truly rest in the pattern of their Creator who had rested on the seventh day, as the story was told, and delight in the creation. So 6 days of work for 7 days of prosperity. It doesn't sound so great to us these days when we're looking for that 3-day weekend, but it was good for back in that day. So Jesus comes into this world that's, again, under the thumb of an empire, kind of like his ancestors had been with the Egyptians. And he starts showing them lessons in nature, and I love that about this person, that they would find lessons in nature. I think I might have this one. He tells them to look at the birds. Look at the ravens. They neither toil, they neither sow nor reap. They have no storehouse. They have no barn. And yet God feeds them. And worrying, which one of you by worrying can add an hour to your lifespan? So you get this idea that there's abundance there, it's available to there, and when we give up our worry and we give up settling for these hierarchies of order that are going to give more to this person and less to this person, there's flow that we can live in. When we give up our ego, our concern for the future, when we just have to have it now, we have to do it our way, we can move into that flow of the presence being everywhere. And this story, it really reminds me of indigenous American Indian wisdom, where they harvest what they need for the day, and maybe just enough to be able to be hospitable to a person that would stop by. And that was the culture of the ancient Near East, was hospitality culture. But they'd have just enough in the American indigenous culture, enough for today, enough for what they needed. And I don't know how many of you have ever read the book Braiding Sweetgrass. It's a beautiful book if you haven't read it. It's written by an indigenous scientist. Her name is Robin Wall Kimmerer. She went into science as a botanist because she loved plants and she wanted to understand how they worked. She's got a PhD, she teaches students, but she's trying to bring the indigenous wisdom into science. And they really don't want a lot of that in science, but it's great. She got a grad student to do a study trying to answer a question that some indigenous elders had about harvesting their sweetgrass. So to them, the plants and the animals are gifts, and they're spiritually related, even with the humans, but they're gifts. And they want to make sure that their gift remains. And in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, there's tons of stories about how to respect nature so that it stays with us. And they wanted to know why some plots of sweetgrass were doing better than others. So she enlisted a grad student, and this little girl decided, no, she's not a little girl, she was in her 20s. she was pregnant too during her study, and she had plots of sweetgrass, and she was going to harvest 2 different methods that they used, but they both were responsible methods. One was you pull it up by the roots, and one you pull it up by the piece that you need. And then she had a plot that she was going to overharvest and a plot that she was not going to harvest. And the prevailing wisdom in science is that any harvesting will damage the growth of the plant, whatever it is. Lo and behold, she found out that harvesting respectfully and responsibly, those were the plots that were the most successful and the most prolific. The plots that were totally ignored died off. And the plots that were overharvested, obviously, there wasn't anything left there. And so we live in a system that a lot of times wants to overuse, overdo everything. You know, when Jesus talked about giving, if the guy takes your coat, give him your shirt, it wouldn't hurt me to give a coat away. I've got 10, you know, but they didn't have that back then. And a lot of people still in this world don't have that to give away. Robin says reciprocity is a matter of keeping the gift in motion through self-perpetuating cycles of giving and receiving. So what I love in some of this ancient wisdom, that there's giving and receiving. There's this idea that there's sufficiency. There's enough of everything for everybody if we use it in a sustainable way. It's meant to be circulated. We're meant to be interdependent with what we have. And it's meant for the common good. And this is kind of in opposition to what I would call the little truth of economy, that there's not enough, there's lack, there's scarcity, and that if we don't get what's ours, we're not going to ever have enough. There's this big pie, and I got to get the biggest piece. But when we quit worrying about how big our piece of pie is, guess what? We just get to enjoy the flavor of what we have right there in front of us. So God understanding that her, whatever, this creation that we live in, we have light and dark, we experience sorrow and joy, we can be good and we can be bad. Understanding that law, that organization for the economy built in cycles. They built in that weekly rest cycle, and then they built in a every 7-year cycle that you would rest the land and you would let the poor just glean off the land. And then they built in a 7 times 7 cycle where debt would be forgiven and people could get land back that they'd lost through this debt system that had been set up. It's the idea that there's a reset, there's a chance to make it equitable again, to recognize that we're all one and that we're all meant to have the abundance. So I kind of love that idea of letting debt go. And debt in the Hebrew can often be translated as sin. It's the same word. Debt and sin are the same word. So people were made to feel like really bad about being in debt. And then they get to have it released. And it's a time of recognizing that all the gifts really come from the Creator. All the gifts are really gifts, and we should share in them equally. So these are reference points for Jesus' teachings about generosity and grace. And again, he uses nature a lot. Consider the lilies. We all know that one. Consider the lilies. They're the ones that neither toil nor spin. I get them confused with the ravens. And if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is just going to be turned into bread tomorrow, how much more will he care about clothing you and giving to you? So Jesus understood that we have a tendency to worry. We have a tendency to want to hold on. We have this thing called ego that wants to grab onto that idea of scarcity and not enough and fear. And so he goes on and he goes on in that passage after he says that, tells people to just give away their stuff and give alms to the poor. He teaches that it's the hungry, the poor, the sorrowful that will inherit the kingdom. And then he gives scathing reviews to the wealthy, the overfed, the ones who are keeping the hierarchy going and making other people less than. And you think then that maybe those, the poor people would say, nanny, nanny, boo-boo, we're going to get the kingdom and you're not. But he right away moves into saying, for all the people, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Turn the other cheek. And if someone takes your coat, give him your shirt also. Give to anyone who begs from you. So there's grace that comes in. We aren't meant to weaponize any of these teachings against one another. We aren't meant to elevate our own status based on something that we've pulled out of these ancient teachings. Grace is a way that we practice reciprocity, and it's not exactly like, oh, I give to you and you give to me. I give to this church and the church gives back to me. It's more like that cycle that we see in nature. So a dead tree is fallen, it's rotted, it's created soil. A seedling grows up, the sun and the atmosphere causes it to grow. It creates sugar, it creates berries. The berries feed the birds and the people and the bears. And then the cycle continues because the birds and the bears, probably not the people, leave a lot of droppings behind to create new trees. So here we are covered in grace of having received generous gifts from our Creator, the source of all abundance. These teachings show that there's abundance, there's sufficient for every need, and that we're to keep it in circulation. We're to keep it in circulation, and that we're to practice forgiveness. Forgiveness, because when we're not practicing forgiveness, we're blocking the circulation. So I invite you to go with me into a meditation at this time. If you're comfortable closing your eyes, you may do so. Otherwise, soften your gaze so that you begin to block out the outside. And begin to move as you breathe into that space where heart and mind know the truth of our being, that we live in an abundant universe, that we have everything that we need. There is one power and one presence. It's active in us right now, right here, in this place, within each of us. We breathe into that knowing. We breathe into that knowing that we are conduits of this abundant energy of life that flows from us to other people, to other beings. That we create abundance to be shared, to be enjoyed, because that's the pattern. To love God, to love our neighbor as ourselves in every way. And we say, amen. And I did want to take just a minute to recognize a couple of things around here. Today's the last day to sign up for being on the board. To me, that's one of the highest levels of sacred service that you could offer to Unity of Dallas. I haven't done it. Ann says I do a lot, but I haven't signed up for that one. It's one of the highest levels of sacred service. We have an active board, And especially when we don't have a minister right now, we have a very active board. So if you've got skills and knowledge that could contribute to keeping us financially stable and spiritually aware and awake, talk to someone out there about signing up for the board. You do have to have been a member for a year to do that. Other things that we have going on, oh yes, this picture. So SoupMobile, you've heard me talk about SoupMobile before. It's a way that we give to people who are unhoused. And it was started by a guy named David Timothy, or Timothy David. He's got two names that could be last names or first names. He was called to feed my sheep. That's what he heard, and that's what he knew was his to do. So he has a mobile feeding ministry that it has grown, and it's beautiful. It's very traditional Christian, but it's beautiful. Out on the street, feeding people, praying with people. So we contribute in the form of cards that they can go to McDonald's with. If anyone's interested in bringing back a more hands-on contribution, we're open to that. It had just gotten where I was the main person doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and I travel a lot. So we thought cards would be adequate. But he sends out a sermon every week. He calls it the 5-minute sermon. It's very brief. This was his sermon this week, this picture. This was it. This was the sermon. There weren't any words. And it's a portrayal of serving others. Serving others. The highest calling is that we serve other people. The other ministry I want to really let you know about, because it's been in your e-news, but I don't know if y'all read all the way to the bottom, is what used to be called North Dallas Shared Ministries. We've been involved for over a decade now, thanks to Ann Drum, David's wife. And it is a ministry now called Now Forward. I love that. They take care of people now, and they help them move forward. And it's a lot of congregations that get together. It's called covenant congregations. We are a covenant congregation. And it's of all different faiths. There's some Jewish temples that are involved. A lot of different groups are involved. And in orientation, she told us, when you're here, this is church. You're doing church. When you're here serving people in this place, you're doing church. They have medical, dental, they have food, they have clothing, they have help with tax preparation during this season, they have back to school help when it comes time to back to school. It's what we formed it for was a way for you guys to volunteer. So if you're looking for hands-on service, talk to me about it. They've got volunteer needs all the time. So we don't want to recreate a food pantry here. We don't want to recreate a clothes closet here. We have a place for that. They do it well. And we can go there and we can be a part of giving back to our neighbors in North Dallas. And it's a two-way street. So if someone in our congregation has a need, they can go there. You have a medical need, you don't have any insurance, you can go there as a part of our being a covenant congregation. So I'm going to be out with Ann at the next table talking. And if anyone's got any questions about any of these ways of serving generously in the world outside these walls, I'm the one to talk to. If you want to talk about being on the board, that's somebody else. And with that, I will leave the stage.
Thank you, Lesa.